Well, hello everyone, and this is Phil Whedon from the Classics World team. I'm joined today by Paul Wager, our group editor, Jeff Ruggles, our news and features editor, and Joe Miller, our head of video. We thought we'd spend a bit of time reminiscing about classic motor shows of years gone by. Most of us have been going to the show for quite a long time now. So chaps, welcome to the call. We can't be at the NEC Birmingham in person this year, which is such a shame because I've probably been going to it for 20 plus years now. Paul, why don't we start with you? You're the sort of group editor of the Classics World portfolio, so that's Classic Car Buyer, Classic Car Mart and Classics Monthly. Why don't you sort of recount us early memories of going to the Classic Motor Show, either as a paying punter or as a journalist?
Well, I can't remember a time when I didn't go to the Classic Motor Show. I mean, it's one of the few shows that I didn't go to with my dad, because I used to go to the regular New Car Motor Show with my dad every year, because he worked for Haynes and he used to get press tickets. But the Classic Motor Show is something I've only ever gone to by myself or with my friends. And we always used to make a little trip of it when we were older, and we used to drive up in whatever beaten up old Chevette we had, or Mini or Escort or something at the time. And I can't remember a time I didn't go. But since then, I've obviously gone every year for work, and it's always been a great chance to catch up socially with people that you don't see for most of the year. People you only know, with voice on the end of a phone.
And what about you, Jeff?
I was quite late to the party, actually. I didn't go to... It's odd, because I used to go to car shows all the time when I was younger and growing up and all the rest of it. But I didn't go to the Classic Motor Show until I started as an editor on Mini Magazine. So it would have been about 2007, 2008 was my first one. And I just remember how vast it was, and I quickly realised I couldn't do it in a day, because I went to one hall, I looked up at my watch thinking it was lunchtime, and they were about to close.
The thing that struck me about it, because the 2019 show was my first one, because I live down in deepest, darkest East Sussex, so Birmingham's a long old trek for me, so I've never been at all. I've never been to Birmingham, let alone for the show.
Well, Birmingham's the north to you, isn't it? Where, of course, it's actually the Midlands.
Anything north of London is the north for me. And that was the thing that struck me, because I was there all the time. I actually dropped our Honda CRX competition car off the day before, so I helped build the show, that tiny little bit of it. But the thing that struck me was I spent the first day trying to see as much as I could in between filming stuff and what have you. The second and third day, I didn't even actually get a chance to go around that much, because I was doing other film shoots and I was in the press room editing things. But even then, I looked at my phone at the end of every day and I hadn't walked less than 6 miles over any of the 3 days. And it's like, that's insane when you think it's one building you're walking around, and it's a car show, it's not a hike.
See photos at the end and you see what people have put on social media and stuff. It's like,
I didn't see that.
And I've been there for, all 3 days.
You generally trip over something fascinating just as you're walking out.
The strange thing for me was when I actually worked it as a club, when I was at the MG Car Club, obviously going to the NEC is their sort of staple show of the year, one of their highlights along with MG Live. And so we were there from Thursday to sort of deepest Sunday night, and it gave you a real chance to appreciate what goes on behind the scenes and how clubs are really the backbone of the event. And the sheer amount of work they put in to put these displays on, and it's such a shame that we can't see the sort of fruits of their labour this year, but I'm sure we will soon.
It's well timed as well, isn't it? Towards the end of the year, we're not competing with loads of other classic car events, both driving tours and other sort of more regional stuff that might conflict. It's indoors, it's towards the end of the season, it feels like the kind of end of year sign off for so many people.
One really good attraction for me was just wandering around the auto jumble stand, sort of picking up things for winter projects, like new old stock parts that are on the desk, and posters and things that you could give as gifts. And
the Auto Jumble was a surprising highlight, because it's things, I mean, you remember around that time we were trying to find a set of rear lights for our Mark III Escort, and we couldn't find a pair online for love nor money. The very first store you walk to in the Auto Jumble, there's a pair of new old stock ones there. And it's all the things you forgot existed.
I mean, we've always used the Classic Motor Show as a really good opportunity to meet new readers, new subscribers, for all of the Kelsey titles. And I remember one year we actually brought along a Chieftain tank to put on our stand. We had a massive stand. We're trying to represent all manner of our magazine brands, and I think we brought the tank along because we were the publishers of Classic Military Vehicle at the time. The problem is with this, I mean, you couldn't imagine the effort it took to get this tank there, the cost and the complexity of getting this.
Not to mention the paperwork.
Well, yeah, exactly right. But it was so big, it concealed all of our branding. So actually you couldn't see that it was our stand. And Obviously, the only way you could do it then was to say, "Oh, we're over by the Chieftain tank in Hall 5 or whatever it was." My other memory, I can't even remember when this was, but we've obviously produced Jaguar World now for 30 plus years. So Jaguar mags have always been quite big for us. So I remember we'd arranged to have one of the 2 Jaguar XK180 concept cars on our stand. One particular enthusiastic showgoer thought they'd lean in to get more photos of the car, but in doing so had pressed a piece of metal chain that we'd used to sort of separate it from the public aisles, dented the sort of bumper bonnet of the XK180, causing a little hairline crease. So of course we had this rather embarrassing phone call the following week to say we've just damaged the priceless XK180 concept car. It wasn't the ideal scenario to come back on. I think it's a really good forum to meet sort of fellow enthusiasts, whether they're journalists or club people or whatever. I think it's just a really good environment for that.
Well, it's that incredibly broad spectrum that the Classic Motor Show brings together, isn't it? I mean, there's all sorts of cars. I mean, where else are you going to find the Italian market version of an Austin Allegro, an Innocenti Regent, which was a big hit last year, I think. People were crowded around that all day. I was trying to take photos of it and I just didn't have a chance. I mean, I think it's probably one of the most popular cars at the show, and who would have thought that? And I think that's what the most important thing about that show is. You've got modern classics, older classics, traditional classics, all sorts together, a tank, and, they're all mixing in harmony. It's great.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed actually over the last 20 years is actually how the variety has probably improved, increased, and steadily you're seeing a kind of a new wave of newer and emerging classic cars. And now that won't suit everybody, but the great thing is it means the appeal of the show broadens as well, because there's still enough of the traditional classic cars as I would see them, as Morris Minors and MGBs and things like that. But then there's this growing swathe of sort of 80s and 90s stuff as well that another generation will find as interesting, if not more so, because they're the cars that they remember from their childhood. If we would have had the real show this year, we'd have launched our Car Mechanics Bargain Cars magazine at this year's show. We're pushing ahead with the launch of the magazine, but that felt to me that was going to be the ideal forum to do it, because it's only really the Classic Motor Show that offers that sort of breadth of more modern classic car. I think it's Hall 8 the last couple of years has been some of those newer and upcoming clubs.
But it's not even that as well. They have traditional classics as well, because we've seen in the last, certainly since TR Youth started, you've had youth branches of the clubs, and they've come together to almost a joint display last year. So you had 4 clubs together, all young members, with an incredible variety of cars, and not just sort of modern classics, but older ones as well, Morris Minors, Sprites, Midgets.
There is that overlap, and I think that's the main thing. As sort of, well, very definitely the youngest member of our team. I suppose for some context there, Phil, you've been going to the show nearly as long as I've been alive. So there's that's a good way to make you feel old.
That hadn't escaped my attention, Joe, but thank you very much for pointing it out.
Anytime, pleasure as always. But like one of the things that stood out to me last year was I've sort of got a few connections in the Rover 200 and 400 owners club, because I ran our one on Fleet last year. So I met with some of them before, and I went to the stand at the NEC last year, and there was a range of cars. They're all beautifully preserved, all in nice condition, dealer stickers and the original brochures and the original option floor mats and all this kind of thing. But there's a real broad range. There's your traditional owner age of kind of middle-aged and up, but also there are some sort of mid to late 20-year-olds, driving cars that are older than they are, that their parents or their grandparents would have had, but it resonated for them enough to preserve a nice example. I think that's fantastic.
No, absolutely. What about you, Paul? I mean, have you noticed any changes over the years?
Oh, yeah, I think it's got a lot more commercial, hasn't it? But then it's got to do that to survive, and I think that's in many ways is a good thing, because it's become a more prominent show. It's not just a few enthusiasts at a pub, it's a proper major show, and I think as a result it's taken the place of what used to be the British Motor Show that doesn't exist anymore, really, at the NEC, and it's probably as big as the first motor show I went to in 1983. So I think that the show is now established as a proper part of the automotive scene in the UK.
It wasn't that long ago that we were celebrating 40,000 people attending the show, and now it's, I think, 70,000. So to have almost doubled in size over a decade or so, I think that's really, really impressive, and it's therefore on a par now with some of the bigger European shows. So I think it's really impressive from that point of view.
And there's people coming from across Europe to see it. I bumped into a couple of German guys who, they'd flown and then driven, done this and that and the other. I mean, realistically, that's a massive trek to go on. When I can't imagine they haven't got anything on that scale locally, but obviously the NEC Classic Show is enough of an appeal for them to go cross multiple countries to be there. It's brilliant.
They're probably sick of BMWs and Beetles. They wanted to see some Morrises and Triumphs.
Yeah, exactly.
They wanted to see Austin Allegro.
Austin Allegro Innocenti.
Yeah, well, who doesn't?
Are you being sponsored by that Austin Allegro? I think you sort of
yes, actually.
Innocenti must be your thing.
Here we go, on the desk, Innocenti Mini, look.
How very appropriate.
Innocenti until proven guilty. Anyway,
God.
Well, for me, the shows that stick in my mind over the years are the ones where I've had to drive cars in. And it's when you go in on the Thursday night with a car that you realise just how much effort goes into that show. But the first time I ever had to take a car to the show, it was a Citroen CX. And I managed to negotiate my way all round through the show, found our stand, parked it up on the carpet, thought, Christ, it's made it here. I'm really pleased about that, because it's a CX Turbo. It's sketchy at the best of times. And I came back and found my mate had seen the car, recognised it, chucked his freshly purchased stuff under the car and thought, I'll get that off Paul later on. Of course, the car sank, didn't it? It's a hydraulic Citroen. It sank, crushed all his stuff. Came back later in the day. Said, can you start it up to lift it up so I can get my stuff out? I said, I'm afraid I won't be able to start the engine till Sunday night. And all his precious parts were all crushed.
Do you know what? We had something quite similar when I did my MG show, first show for the MGCC, because we had the ex-Gene Denton London to Sydney Marathon MGB, and it was getting delivered and we didn't know when it was coming. The MGB register had got in a bit of a panic. They're like, where's the car? Where's the car? And then I sort of just looked over the show and I was like, there it is. And it turned out it had been dropped off on the MG Owners Club stand by mistake. So they had our display cars. We had to sort of gently steal it back. I'm sure the club will thank me for telling everyone about that, but it was quite a funny moment.
I've never had anything quite at that scale, but I do remember sort of waiting for magazines to be delivered to sell on the stand because they'd have been printed up the road in Wolverhampton, so a nearby printer. So they've not got very far to go, but they would still be delivered to the wrong hall and you'd be running through halls, sort of carrying bundles of newspapers and things like that. It was just always a logistical nightmare. But
we didn't have anything to sit on in our stand, did we, unless we had the magazines delivered?
You two saying about driving cars in and being part of it and everything else. My very first experience of the show, in terms of my first bit of my first year of it, was driving our CRX in last year. And obviously you queue up for ages, and I'd driven from Peterborough, where we used to be based, to Birmingham. So the car needed cleaning. So I'm sat in the queue to get in the show, washing the car with a bucket of washing water I brought with me and a sponge and everything else, drying the car off, just about get it driven in, hoping it's not dripping everywhere from where I haven't quite dried it. I went all the way through, and so I said, oh, and where's the Kelsey Media stand? I was down there, right, 2 stores down to your right, lovely. So I went all the way through, got down, and presumably it was like that moment in Home Alone where Donald Trump gave the wrong direction to Kevin, because I'd been told 2 down and to the right and it was 2 down and to the left. So I'd gone the wrong way. And for those of you that don't know, the CRX doesn't have power steering. So I'm sat in this tiny little show stand trying desperately not to knock every single stand over with a prize car that I can't damage, doing a 96-point turn in the CRX, parking it up. That was last year, wasn't it, Jeff? Our friends at Lancaster Insurance unveiled their XR3i competition car. So we were having to drive both of the cars out together on top of about 400 or 500 other exhibition cars. That really hammered home to me the sense of scale for a show like that. You know, you've got people with like an MGT type rolling through. There's us in an XR3 and a CRX, and there's a Rover 800 and a Metro and a Fiat Cinquecento and all sorts of things. That even just the queue going out is as good as the show itself because of the variety.
It's always the pride of ownership cars and the Maguire Showcase cars that really sort of stand out, because as I've said before, I just love the mix. I love the sort of wild custom cars, the Beetles, you know, the Minis, the Metros, an MG Maestro, you know, that incredible mix. And I really quite like the Minor Million that won. Perhaps not the Lilac Shade, but, you know, what a car that was and how well prepared. And
I go back to my original point about the variety. I love the fact that you will see, say, a Porsche 911 or a Ferrari Testarossa, and then in another hall you'll see a Fiat Tipo or something. You think, oh my God, I'd just forgotten a Fiat Tipo even existed. You know, there can't be many left on Britain's roads today.
I love the stuff that goes along with the cars, because all the cars, you've probably seen them before in some capacity if you work on a car magazine. I love the sort of stuff that pops up at the Classic Motor Show that you just don't see. Like one year on the Volvo Owners Club stand, I was chatting to a gent about a plastic Volvo bicycle, push bike that had been produced as part of a city bike scheme. I never expected to see that. I found it interesting.
Well, I think Chaps, we should probably sign off because we could probably talk for 3 solid days as if we were at the show, but we should probably wrap it up because I'm sure we've got some work to do as well. I hope that was a useful insight to Classic Motor Show memories of years gone by. It's such a pity we couldn't see some of you at this year's event, but we'll look forward to catching up with as many of you as possible in the 2021 Lancaster Insurance Classic Motor Show at the NEC. So see you then, hopefully. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.